Don't touch that, Vance. Leave the real weapons to real sailors. The jeer split the deck, sharp as steel on steel. Laughter stomped in boots against the sun-blazed metal of the USS Horizon. Lyra Vance kept her head low, fastening the Tomahawk's straps, swallowing the sneers. Then, snap! A cable tore loose with the crack of a gunshot. The missile lurched, 30 feet of steel swinging wide, its tail scything toward a frozen crewman. Only Lyra moved. She lunged, seized the sailor, and ripped him clear of the killing arc. Her shoulder slammed into the trembling frame, the world holding its breath. And in that silence, her sleeve slipped, revealing the forbidden patch blazing red and black in the sun. This is Veteran Biker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. The deck of the USS Horizon still thrummed with the aftershock of that snap. For a moment, it felt as if the entire vessel held its breath, every rivet and plate of steel tensed by the echo of that broken line. The great missile swayed at an angle, restrained now by the last surviving cable and the improvised safety pin Lyra had driven into the housing. The sailor she had yanked clear still sat sprawled against the bulkhead, gasping, his eyes refusing to blink as though the world might shatter again if he dared look away. Around him, men who had been laughing only seconds earlier stood stiff, their boots nailed to the sun-baked deck. The patch glared from her sleeve, red and black in the light, a fragment of cloth that suddenly weighed more than the warhead it accompanied. Nobody spoke, yet every gaze seemed drawn inexorably to that emblem. Whispers began at the fringes, half-formed questions mouthed but never completed, strangled by disbelief. Lyra tugged her jacket back into place, but the image had already seared into the crew's memory. The officer of the watch broke first, his voice faltering as he barked for damage control teams. Men scrambled belatedly, moving to secure the missile, check the rigging, sweep the area for hazards. The ordinary business of naval life resumed, but the rhythm was broken. Each action hesitant, cautious. All of it revolved subtly around the woman who had just dragged one of their own from death and stopped a weapon from tumbling free. Lyra herself said nothing. She returned to the missile stand, eyes on the mechanisms, hands brushing over, bolts and levers as though reacquainting herself with an old adversary. Her movements were economical, practiced, stripped of hesitation. She didn't need to look at manuals or shout for help. Her body already knew the sequence, as if muscle memory had been forged long before she ever stepped aboard this ship. The sailor she had saved staggered upright. His face was pale, damp with sweat, and he seemed uncertain whether to thank her or shrink away. He glanced at the others for guidance, but no one offered it. The laughter that had once buoyed them was gone, replaced with silence heavy enough to bend spines. From the command platform above, Admiral Marcus Hale descended. He did not hurry, yet every step seemed to press against the air like a weight. A man built from years of salt and iron, Hale carried the authority of oceans in his stride. His eyes, normally a stormy grey that scanned battlefields from behind a wall of command, were locked on one thing only, the cloth on Lyra's arm. He reached the deck and halted a few paces from her. She straightened reflexively, though not in the crisp posture of a subordinate. It was more the stance of someone unwilling to yield ground. Hale studied her, his silence louder than any reprimand. Around them, sailors lingered at the periphery, unwilling to leave, drawn by the gravity of the moment. "You secured the ordnance," Hale said finally, his tone controlled, betraying nothing. "Yes, sir," she replied. Her voice was low, steady, carrying neither pride nor apology. "And that patch," he continued, his eyes narrowing, "where did you acquire it?" The question fell like a blade between them. A murmur rippled through the nearby crew, the name Spectre Division whispered by those who recognized the colors. Most had only heard rumors, a ghost unit spoken of in training halls, missions hinted at but never recorded. The division was said to have vanished decades ago, swallowed by classified files and political purges. Lyra did not answer. She tightened one last clamp on the missile cradle, then stepped back. Her silence was not defiance, but something sharper, the refusal to acknowledge the question itself. Hale studied her longer, but no flicker of reaction gave him leverage. "Resume your stations," the Admiral ordered curtly. His words were directed to the crew, but his gaze never left Lyra. Men drifted back to duties, though their eyes lingered. Some worked with deliberate noise, as if to mask the unease building in their chests. Others moved quietly, hoping not to draw attention, as though standing too close to her might ignite some unseen fuse. Lyra wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Beneath the noise of tools and shouted commands, she heard only the hollow ring of memory pressing in. The way her body had reacted when the cable snapped, it wasn't instinct, not in the ordinary sense. It was training, the kind of training no logistics clerk was ever supposed to receive. And now it had shown itself to the one man aboard who could not afford to ignore it. Above them, the Mediterranean sky remained clear, a field of hard blue stretching to every horizon. But that serenity belied the tension crawling over the deck. Word would spread through the ship faster than any official communique. The woman mocked, as a porter had moved with the precision of someone forged in classified shadows. She felt the weight of eyes, even as backs turned. Respect was not what she heard in that silence. It was caution, and beneath it, fear. The men around her had faced storms and shells, but they had never faced the unknown, and she represented that most of all. Hale remained for several minutes longer before climbing back to his post. He spoke quietly with his aides, their faces pale as they stole glances toward her. Lyra returned to work, rechecking every tie-down and clamp along the ordnance racks, ensuring there would be no second failure. Yet her motions carried an edge of finality, as though each tightened bolt was also sealing away the secrets she had let slip. At last, the repaired rigging stood secure, cables taut and silent once more. The missile loomed steady in its berth, its threat contained. But the true disruption lingered not in steel or rope, but in the human heart. Everyone on that deck understood something had changed. The laughter that once reduced her to nothing had been silenced, and, in its place, a question grew like fire. Who exactly was Lyra Vance? She did not intend to answer. Not here. Not yet. The Mediterranean sun had already begun its slow crawl westward, gilding the steel deck of the horizon with a harsh glare. The smell of scorched metal lingered after the near disaster, mingling with the salt wind and jet fuel that clung to every naval vessel. The sailors had resumed their motions, at least outwardly, but their eyes betrayed them. Even as they tightened clamps and rechecked gear, glances darted again, and again toward the woman who had moved faster than reason allowed. Lyra ignored them. Her focus remained on the equipment in front of her, hands tracing lines of tension, testing the new rigging. The missile was steady again, yet the unease it stirred had not gone with the wind. Somewhere deep in her chest, a rhythm old as forgotten drills pulsed back to life. She thought she had buried it, but the world had a way of tearing open what you tried hardest to keep hidden. Then the ship's calm fractured. A siren howled from the command tower, sharp enough to cut through metal, Its pitch was different from the usual drills, urgent in a way that pried adrenaline loose before the mind could reason why. Red lights began to strobe along the bulkheads, painting every face in the crimson wash of danger. "Contact incoming!" A voice blared through the loudspeakers. "Hostile launch detected. Bearing east, closing fast." The deck crew froze only a second before instinct shoved them into motion. Sailors sprinted to stations. Officers barked orders into headsets, the entire ship shifting into the rigid choreography of combat readiness. Boots slammed against the deck, chains rattled, covers were torn away from consoles and panels. Lyra turned her head toward the bridge. Through the glass, she could see shapes moving frantically. Radar operators hunched over screens, hands flying. She recognized the cadence. This wasn't a drill. Someone had fired on them. "Stand by Tomahawk battery!" The command snapped across the deck like a whip. Crews converged on the launch racks, moving with speed sharpened by fear. Hatches groaned open, the enormous steel tubes waiting to breathe fire, and then the rhythm broke again. "Malfunction! Tube 3 not cycling!" a petty officer shouted, his voice cracking. "Load sequence frozen!" The words landed heavier than any shell. Without that tube, their counterstrike would be crippled. The enemy's missile would reach them long before another vessel could intercept. Men swarmed the console, fingers stabbing at switches, but the system refused. Lights blinked amber. Warning codes streamed across screens no one had time to interpret. Someone slammed a fist against the housing. Another cursed under his breath, sweat already streaking his temple. Lyra's stomach knotted. She had seen that exact jam before, years ago, in circumstances no one here could imagine. The design flaw was subtle, buried in the hydraulics of the loading arm, a quirk that only manifested when stress loads aligned just wrong. It was the kind of problem no textbook mentioned, only whispered among those who had worked with these weapons in places that never made headlines. "Clear the line. Let engineering handle it." An officer bellowed, pushing men back, but the engineering team was already there, tools clattering, hands prying at bolts they barely understood. The seconds bled away too fast. Overhead, the loudspeaker crackled again. "Enemy missile. 3 minutes to impact." The number struck the crew like a hammer. Faces blanched, jaws clenched, movements grew jerky. They had time to stop it, if the Tomahawk left its cradle now, but the machine remained inert, a beast chained by its own failing. Lyra felt the pull in her muscles before she made the choice. The world around her dulled, sound narrowing to the pounding in her chest. She stepped forward. "Vance, stay clear!" One of the officers barked, his voice half panic, half command. "This isn't your station." She didn't break stride. The cluster of engineers parted instinctively, some in protest, others in confused relief, as if on some level they already knew she belonged there. She crouched by the control bank, her fingers brushing over levers and seals like greeting old acquaintances. It was all still the same. The years hadn't changed the feel of the steel, the order of the valves. She closed her eyes just for a moment, memory overlaying present reality. Another ship, another crisis, another set of lives in her hands. Then she exhaled and let her hands move. First, the manual override, a recessed lever most forgot existed. She yanked it free, the clang echoing like a pistol shot. Then the sequence of pressure releases, staggered precisely to bleed the jammed hydraulics without detonating the system. She murmured the order under her breath, the way her instructors had drilled into her until it became incantation. Valve, switch, reset, prime. The crew watched, breath held. Some recognized the procedure, most did not, but all felt the inevitability of it. Her movements weren't guesses. They were choreography, every step deliberate. The lights on the panel shifted. Amber flickered, then steadied into green. The hydraulics shuddered, groaned, then settled. The arm locked into place. "System reset complete," Lyra said, her voice calm as the sea, though her pulse thundered. For a heartbeat, silence held them. Then the officer of the battery roared, "Cycle complete! Launch authorized!" A cheer erupted, but it was cut by the next announcement over the intercom: "Impact in 90 seconds." The tube's hatch snapped open. Inside, the Tomahawk waited, its nose pointed toward the invisible horizon. Crews scrambled to finalize connections. Every second mattered now. Lyra stepped back, letting them take over, but the echoes of her actions clung to the air. She could feel it in their stares, the mixture of awe and suspicion, gratitude and fear. She had saved them from paralysis, but in doing so, she had revealed knowledge no ordinary technician should ever possess. The deck shuddered as the launch sequence engaged. Heat blossomed, smoke venting through the exhaust channels, a mechanical beast awakening. The missile roared free, the thunder shaking the bones of the ship. White contrails slashed across the sky, arrowing toward the unseen threat. On the bridge, Admiral Hale's silhouette remained rigid, his gaze never leaving the launch arc. He knew what he had seen. The others might drown in relief or cheer their survival, but he had caught every flicker of her hands, every unhesitating adjustment. And he alone grasped what it meant. Lyra didn't watch the missile vanish into the blue. She turned away, back toward the sailor she had saved earlier. He was still pale, still shaken, but his eyes locked on her with something different now. No longer mockery, no longer contempt. It was a question, sharp and unspoken. "Who are you?" She offered no answer. She simply adjusted her sleeve, pulling the fabric higher up her arm, covering the patch again. But concealment no longer mattered. The truth had already taken root, spreading through every corner of the horizon. The alarm cut off. A voice came through. Enemy projectile neutralized. Intercept successful. Applause broke in pockets, men clapping each other's backs, relief crashing over them like a wave. Yet amid the celebration, a strange quiet wrapped around Lyra. Those closest to her didn't join the cheers. They just stared. Above, Hale leaned toward his aide. His voice carried just far enough for her to catch. "Spectre Division. Alive." The words struck like another siren, though no bell rang. She forced her face into stillness, though every nerve screamed. The Admiral knew. And once spoken aloud, the name could not be put back in the dark. The cheer that had rippled across the horizon dwindled quickly, as though the wind itself had snatched it away. Relief clung to the crew in scattered bursts, but something heavier pressed over them. The air no longer vibrated with the tension of an incoming strike, yet a different kind of silence had taken hold, one that had nothing to do with enemy fire. Admiral Marcus Hale descended again from the command platform. This time he did not stride with the brisk authority of command, but with measured steps that drew every eye without a word. Men straightened as he passed, not out of drilled discipline, but because his presence demanded it. He carried no clipboard, no report, only questions heavy enough to bend the deck beneath his boots. Lyra Vance remained near the launcher, her hands resting lightly on the rail, her posture steady. The patch was hidden once more beneath her sleeve, but the memory of its colors was carved into every sailor's mind. It could not be unseen. Hale stopped before her. The crew melted back, forming an unspoken circle, as though they all knew this moment belonged solely to the two of them. Wind tugged at uniforms, carrying the tang of burned propellant. "You knew what you were doing," Hale said at last. His tone was low, not the bark of orders, but something sharper, a blade pressed under the ribs. Lyra met his gaze. "I did what was necessary." The Admiral's jaw tightened. Around them, sailors pretended to be busy, yet none moved far. They strained to listen, tools hanging forgotten in their hands. "Necessary," Hale repeated. His eyes flicked to the sealed hatches where smoke still drifted, then back to her. "That was not training issued to you here. Those aren't procedures you pick up from manuals. Where did you learn it?" Lyra's silence stretched. Her eyes, dark and steady, revealed nothing. She had mastered that restraint long ago. Never explain, never confirm. The officer of the watch approached, holding out a data slate. Hale took it without breaking his stare. Lines of diagnostics scrolled across the screen. Every step of the reset logged, time-stamped. The record bore witness to each action she had taken, each correction executed in perfect sequence. It was irrefutable. The Admiral dismissed the officer with a flick of his hand. He lifted his gaze again, his voice pitched to carry just far enough for all to hear. "Spectre Division, you carry its mark, and now you demonstrate its hand." A murmur surged through the crowd. Some gasped, others frowned in confusion. A few older sailors exchanged looks, as though dredging up half-forgotten rumors. The name had not been spoken aloud in years, but legends have long shadows. Lyra's lips pressed thin. She turned back to the launcher, checking a valve that did not need checking. Anything to avoid the weight of his words. "Answer me," Hale pressed. She finally faced him. "What would you have me say, Admiral? That I've seen things I shouldn't? That I know patterns that don't exist? Would it make a difference?" The Admiral's features hardened further, though something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger, but recognition. For a heartbeat his composure cracked, and Lyra saw it. The memory of his own involvement, buried but not forgotten. The sailors felt the shift, even if they didn't understand it. The circle around them grew tighter, curiosity outweighing fear. Hale stepped closer, his voice a shade softer, meant only for her but still audible to those nearest. "That program was buried for a reason. No records, no survivors." His gaze dipped briefly to her covered arm. "Yet here you stand." Lyra held the silence again. She would not confirm, but she would not deny either. Her restraint itself was confirmation enough. Behind them the horizon stretched empty, calm seas glinting under the sun. Yet the stillness only magnified the unease aboard. For men trained to fight visible enemies, the unseen was unbearable. And Lyra, with her composure and her secrets, embodied the unseen more than any warhead. One of the younger sailors, emboldened by the silence, blurted, "Sir, what is Spectre Division?" The words hung like a spark in dry grass. Hale turned sharply, his eyes cutting the man down without a shout. "It's nothing you need to know." But the damage was done. Questions flared behind every gaze. If their Admiral refused to speak, then the woman standing before them would become the answer, whether she liked it or not. Lyra exhaled, slow and measured. She had endured interrogations before, but this was different. Those men on the deck were not enemies. They were comrades who wanted to trust her, but didn't know if they could. "Return to your duties," Hale ordered, louder this time, snapping the spell. The sailors scattered reluctantly, casting glances over their shoulders as they went. The circle broke, but the tension did not. Hale remained. "Walk with me." He turned without waiting for consent, striding toward the shadow of the superstructure. Lyra followed, her boots striking in rhythm with his. Neither spoke until the noise of the deck faded, replaced by the hum of machinery within the passageways. Only then did Hale stop, pivoting to face her beneath the dim lights of the corridor. "You forced my hand." Whatever game you're playing, whatever past you've tried to bury, it's on the surface now. The crew has seen too much. Lyra's eyes narrowed. I didn't ask for this. I tried to stay quiet, but when steel snaps and lives hang in balance, silence is not an option. Hale leaned closer, his voice a growl. You think I don't recognize the way you moved out there? I signed the order to dissolve that unit. I watched the reports, every line claiming there were no survivors. And yet somehow you slipped through. For the first time, Lyra's expression faltered. A shadow of memory brushed across her face, but she recovered quickly. Then you already know enough. Leave it there. The Admiral studied her, searching for cracks, but she gave him nothing more. At last he exhaled, long and heavy, a sound of someone wrestling with ghosts. We are not finished, he said, his tone flat. But for now, your skill saved this ship. That is the only reason I'm not confining you immediately. Lyra inclined her head, not in gratitude but acknowledgement. Understood. Hale straightened, his authority sliding back into place. Return to your post, but know this, every eye aboard is on you, and so are mine. He turned and strode away, leaving her alone in the corridor. Lyra leaned briefly against the bulkhead, feeling the vibration of the engines through steel. She closed her eyes, the phantom echo of old voices whispering through her. Memory, orders given in shadowed rooms, missions erased before they began. She thought she had walked away from all of it, but secrets, like ghosts, had a way of clawing back into daylight. When she opened her eyes again, her face was calm. She pushed off the wall and walked back toward the deck. The crew watched her re-emerge, their conversations faltering mid-sentence. No one spoke directly to her, but the weight of their stares said everything. Respect, suspicion, fear. They could not decide which outweighed the other. And above them all, Admiral Hale stood at the rail, eyes fixed on her like a man staring at a storm he could not stop. The sea lay deceptively calm around the horizon. Sunlight broke across the water in fractured silver, waves heaving gently against the hull as though nothing at all had changed. Yet above the polished surface, tension thickened like storm clouds invisible to the eye. The crew went about their duties, but their movements lacked rhythm. Each man and woman aboard carried the image of what they had seen. Lyra moving as if she belonged to a world outside their own, the Admiral naming a unit thought erased. When she stepped back onto the open deck, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations faltered, even the clang of tools seemed to dull. She felt their eyes, the same way one senses a weapon leveled from the dark. Curiosity weighed heavier than fear now, and that made it more dangerous. Lyra kept her gaze forward, her steps measured. Pretending not to notice was easier than acknowledging what she could not undo. She had spent years teaching herself the art of being invisible, only to have a single rupture of steel drag her back into sight. From the command rail, Admiral Hale's figure loomed. He had not left his post since their exchange in the corridor. His face was unreadable, carved from stone and shadow. If he wrestled with guilt, doubt, or recognition, he did not allow it to surface. Only his eyes betrayed movement, tracking her like a hawk following prey. The quiet fractured again. Alarms wailed, this time deeper, steadier. The unmistakable voice of war crying out across steel. Lights strobed along the length of the ship, not the brief flare of drills, but the unrelenting pattern of imminent threat. "Multiple launches detected!" a voice thundered through the loudspeaker. Inbound strike package, impact window closing fast. Chaos surged back onto the deck. Sailors sprinted, orders flew. The machine of combat stirred once more. Men clambered over railings, unlocking safety chains, preparing launch systems. Others sealed hatches, bracing the vessel for impact. But even as the crew moved, dread sharpened every step. One incoming missile had been enough to strain their nerves. Now there were several. Lyra moved with the tide, blending into the flow of bodies without hesitation. She didn't need to ask what was happening. The rising pitch of voices, the stutter of reports carried across the wind told her everything. This wasn't an isolated strike. The enemy had chosen to bleed them through relentless pressure. On the bridge, Hale's voice rolled over the intercom, steady despite the roar of movement around him. "Prepare for counter-launch! All batteries hot." The words steadied the crew, anchoring them in routine. Yet beneath the veneer of discipline, anxiety pressed harder. They had survived once, thanks to luck and something unexplainable. Would fortune hold again? The first salvo of Tomahawks primed. Steel roared, hydraulics hissed. The tubes shuddered as their payloads aligned for release. The deck rumbled with the weight of machines waking from slumber. Then another blow fell. "System fault! Battery 2 offline!" shouted a technician, his voice breaking through the noise. Hydraulic pressure failing. The reaction was immediate. Engineers rushed to the affected bank, eyes wide at the error messages blooming across panels. Men barked for spanners and sealant packs, hands fumbling at valves, desperate to patch what was slipping. Lyra's gut clenched. The problem was different from the earlier jam, but no less catastrophic. She recognized the telltale shudder in the tubes, the whining note in the hydraulics. A seal had cracked somewhere deep inside the system. Without pressure, the loading arms would seize before the missiles could align, leaving the ship exposed. She stayed where she was at first. Hale's warning echoed in her mind, his vow that every eye aboard was watching. To move again to intervene would tighten the noose of suspicion already choking her. But then the intercom blared again. Impact window, 5 minutes. The number was smaller than it sounded. Minutes dissolved like water in combat. She saw the crew's hands shaking, tools slipping from sweat-slick palms. Panic gnawed at the edges of order, and she knew in the marrow of her bones that if she did nothing, men would die. Her body moved before doubt could anchor it. She cut across the deck, shouldering past a petty officer without apology. "Clear this station," she snapped. The tone of command slipped from her mouth unbidden, the kind that brooked no argument. The officer staggered back, startled, but obeyed. Lyra dropped to her knees by the panel, eyes raking over the gauges. The pressure had collapsed completely. She didn't hesitate. Her fingers danced across levers, rerouting auxiliary lines, bypassing the main feed entirely. It was an old trick, one never taught to naval engineers, because it wasn't supposed to exist. But in the black halls of Spectre training, they had drilled contingencies for every failure imaginable. A wrench appeared at her side, handed by the very man she had shoved aside. He didn't speak, only watched, his face pale. She took it, spun open a valve, and let a controlled hiss of steam escape. Then she rerouted the pressure through a manual regulator, locking it in place with a slam of metal. The tubes groaned, shuddered, then steadied. The gauges climbed, creeping from red toward amber, then green. "System stabilized!" A sailor cried, relief cracking his voice. The announcement rolled across the deck like thunder. Cheering threatened to rise, but it was cut short by Hale's voice, sharp and commanding. "Focus on the launch! Fire now!" The deck erupted again in motion. Tubes roared, smoke vented. The Tomahawks leapt free in searing trails. White arcs split the sky, angling upward to meet the death rushing toward them. Lyra staggered back, chest heaving. She could feel the weight of their stares again, heavier than before. She had not only stepped into the breach once more, she had commanded it, bending the crew to her will without hesitation. That could not be hidden. Above, Hale's silhouette loomed against the sky. He had watched everything. His expression remained carved from iron, but his hands gripped the rail tight enough for the knuckles to blanch. The loudspeaker crackled. Enemy strike package intercepted. All targets destroyed. The words sent a wave of release across the vessel. Men clapped backs. Others slumped in relief. Some simply stared at the sky, as though they could see the invisible battle etched against the horizon. But the relief was thinner this time. It could not mask the awareness spreading like wildfire. Twice now, survival had hinged not on standard protocol, but on the intervention of one woman who should never have known what she knew. Hale raised his voice, carrying across the deck. "Crew of the Horizon, remember your duty. We endure not by chance, but by resolve. Return to your stations, we are not finished." The words steadied the crew, pulling them back to discipline. Yet the Admiral's eyes, locked on Lyra, told a different story. His jaw was taut, his gaze unyielding, as if trying to solve an equation that refused to balance. Lyra adjusted her sleeve again, though it no longer mattered. They had seen enough without the emblem. Her cover was unraveling thread by thread. The whispers that followed her grew louder with each pass, men too nervous to speak. To her directly, but unable to stop themselves from muttering behind her back. She walked toward the rail, the sea stretching endless and bright before her. For a moment, she let the wind wash over her face, closing her eyes. In the noise of victory and suspicion, she found a fleeting sliver of calm. But even as the waves glittered under the sun, she felt it, the truth pressing closer. The ship no longer saw her as one of many. She had become a symbol, whether she wanted it or not, and symbols, she knew, rarely lived long in peace. Behind her, Admiral Hale descended the steps once more. His voice was low, meant for her alone this time. "You've shown your hand twice now. The next move isn't yours to choose." Lyra turned slightly, catching his eyes. For the first time, she allowed a flicker of defiance to surface. "Then make your move, Admiral. I'm done hiding." The words hung between them, sharp as steel, as the horizon ploughed forward, into seas that glittered with sunlight but promised storms unseen. The sea no longer looked calm. What only hours earlier shimmered in sunlight now felt hostile, the horizon itself holding menace. Every man on deck sensed it. The danger was not past. The intercepted missiles had been a warning, not the conclusion. The enemy would not relent. The loudspeaker confirmed it. Multiple surface contacts detected. Hostile vessels closing fast. The words landed heavy. A ripple went through the crew like a current through wire. Sailors who had braved storms without blinking felt their throats tighten. A missile strike was terror enough, but enemy ships pushing forward meant a confrontation that could not be dodged. Lyra stood near the launcher housing, her eyes narrowing at the announcement. She did not need to see the radar screen to know what it meant. She had studied enough campaigns, fought through enough hidden encounters, to recognize this rhythm, soften with distance, then close to finish. Admiral Hale's voice cut across the deck. "Battle stations. All guns hot. Prepare for surface engagement." Men sprinted, pulling tarps off cannons, locking shells into magazines. The clatter of steel on steel rose, punctuated by shouted orders. Somewhere deep in the hull, the engines growled louder, driving the vessel to adjust position. Lyra moved with deliberate calm, though her pulse quickened. She had lived this before, in shadows where her name never appeared. The rhythm of war was familiar, no matter how the uniforms changed. A petty officer shouted from the starboard side, "Secondary battery offline. Power relay dead." Heads snapped toward him. The secondary guns were vital for close-range defense. Without them, the Horizon would be forced to rely solely on its primaries, too slow to repel fast craft swarming ahead. Technicians scrambled for the relay housing, tearing open panels. Sparks spat, wires hissed, the acrid scent of burnt insulation filling the air. Panic prickled at the edge of their movements. Lyra's fists clenched at her sides. She could almost hear her old instructors whispering, "Redundancy fails when sabotage is precise. It wasn't coincidence." Someone wanted this ship crippled before the real fight began. She forced herself forward, weaving past crew who barely registered her. At the relay housing, she crouched, eyes scanning the mess of wiring. She saw it instantly, a bypass scorched deliberately, as though someone had overloaded it from within. "Back up," she ordered, her voice like iron. The startled engineers hesitated, then shifted aside. She tore a glove from her pocket, yanked a pair of cutters from a toolkit, and set to work. Her hands moved with controlled fury, stripping and reattaching lines in an order no manual prescribed. "Don't!" one man started, then stopped as he recognized the precision in her actions. She wasn't guessing. She was rewriting the circuit with the ease of someone who had done it blindfolded. Within seconds, the relay hummed. The lights on the console flickered back to life. Power surged through the secondary guns. "All batteries back online!" a sailor cried, voice cracking with disbelief. Relief shuddered across the deck, but it was tainted with something darker. Twice before, she had acted with skill unearned by her rank. Now there could be no doubt. She was not who she claimed to be. From the bridge, Hale's eyes locked on her again. If suspicion had lingered before, now it hardened into certainty. Enemy range closing, came the next call. Visual contact in 10 minutes. The horizon grew teeth. Dark shapes cut the glinting sea, their silhouettes swelling with each passing breath. Masts bristled with weapons, hulls slicing the water with predatory intent. The horizon adjusted course, presenting its broadsides. Cannons angled skyward, barrels gleaming in sunlight. Sailors loaded shell after shell, sweat pouring, hearts hammering. Lyra felt it all. The vibration of engines underfoot, the salt air thick with tension, the taste of anticipation on every tongue. She stepped toward the rail, her eyes fixed on the oncoming line of steel. Beside her, the sailor she had saved earlier hovered. His voice was hushed, awed. You shouldn't know how to do what you just did." Lyra didn't look at him. "No, I shouldn't." His words died. He had no answer, only the weight of realization. A thunderous boom split the air. The first enemy shell arced skyward, black smoke curling from its wake. Moments later, it crashed into the water 100 yards off, sending up a geyser of spray. The battle had begun. "Horizon, return fire!" Hale roared. The ship shuddered as its own cannons belched flame. Recoil hammered through steel, smoke rolling across the deck. The air filled with the deafening exchange of war, sky and sea torn open by iron. Lyra braced herself against the railing, watching trajectories with a sniper's eye. She could almost feel the angles, the mathematics of destruction written in the air. The gunners aimed well, but her instincts screamed corrections they could not see. She moved to the nearest fire control officer. "Shift elevation 2 degrees, starboard spread wider," she said sharply. The man blinked. "That's not in the fire plan. Do it!" Something in her tone broke his hesitation. He relayed the adjustment. The next volley roared free, shells screaming across the waves. Through the haze, Lyra saw them land. detonations striking closer, forcing the lead enemy vessel to veer. Cheers rose, but they were short-lived. More incoming fire rained down, one shell slamming into the ocean so near the deck that spray drenched the crew. Men coughed, eyes stinging with salt and smoke. Lyra's blood thrummed. She had no weapon in hand, yet she was fighting all the same, guiding trajectories, correcting angles, saving seconds that meant lives. Her body moved without permission, pulled by the rhythm she had tried so long to forget. Hale's gaze never left her. Even in the chaos, he watched how she slipped through the crew like a commander without insignia, directing, correcting, always precise. Then the intercom blared again. Fast craft approaching. Enemy boats inbound, closing on port side. Lyra swung her head. Through the spray and smoke she saw them, sleek attack boats cutting the waves, bristling with mounted guns. They were aiming to swarm, to pierce the horizon's defenses at close range. The secondary batteries whirred, turning, but the crews were green, rattled by the barrage. Their fire would be too scattered. Without thinking, Lyra seized a headset from a frozen petty officer. Her voice cracked across the channel. Port gunners, tighten spread, aim for wakes, not hulls. Herd them inward, collapse their formation. The startled gunners obeyed. Streams of fire erupted, shells hammering the water around the incoming craft. As if struck by an invisible hand, the enemy boats veered into each other's paths, their formation unraveling. One boat caught the full brunt of fire, exploding in a blossom of flame. The crew erupted, a roar of victory surging across the deck, but Hale's face remained carved from stone. He knew what they had witnessed yet again, knowledge no one had given her, skills no civilian specialist could possess. The battle raged on, steel against steel, fire against fire. Yet amid the chaos, the truth spread faster than smoke. Lyra Vance was not who she claimed to be. And with every command she gave, with every adjustment that saved lives, the question grew louder, impossible to ignore. Who was she really? The horizon had turned into a battlefield. Smoke smeared across the sky in jagged streaks, the sea beneath it hammered into chaos by the pounding of shells. The horizon shuddered with each recoil, the deck vibrating under boots as the crew fought to keep rhythm in the deafening storm. Enemy ships pressed forward, their silhouettes swelling larger, weapons flashing in steady rhythm. Explosions bloomed across the waves, water spouts towering like pillars before collapsing in sheets of spray. Lyra gripped the railing, her hair whipped by the salt-laden wind. Around her, sailors loaded, aimed, shouted, the controlled madness of combat in full tilt. Yet within the chaos, her mind was cold, tracking patterns, predicting arcs, calculating shifts before they appeared. She had been here before, though never in daylight, never with so many witnesses. A shell screamed overhead and slammed into the water just off the bow. The deck pitched, men thrown to their knees, one sailor tumbling dangerously close to the edge. Lyra lunged, catching his collar and yanking him back. Her own body jolted against the steel. He gasped, dazed but alive. She pushed him toward cover without a word. More alarms cut through the air. Port turret jammed. We've lost elevation control. Hale's voice thundered from the bridge. Get it back online! Technicians scrambled to the turret housing, tools clattering, voices tight with panic. But Lyra was already moving. She dropped to the maintenance hatch, sliding inside the cramped guts of the gun system. Heat and noise slammed into her, sweat breaking instantly across her skin. She crawled through the narrow passage, light flickering from sparking wires. There, the actuator had seized, hydraulics straining against a stuck piston. She grabbed a lever, forced it down, metal groaning in protest. With her other hand, she jammed a wedge into the jammed valve, redirecting pressure. The gun above shifted, sluggish at first, then locked into proper elevation. "Turret restored!" someone shouted from above. Lyra crawled back out, streaked with grease, her breaths ragged. She emerged into blinding sunlight just as the turret fired, the thunderclap shaking her bones. The crew saw her crawl from the hatch, filthy but unshaken. Their expressions told the story: awe, disbelief, suspicion, all tangled together. No logistics clerk belonged inside that system. Yet she had made it work. Again. Hale watched from the bridge. He said nothing, but his silence was more pointed than words. He remembered a younger man years ago, sitting at a desk piled with files stamped classified. He remembered signing an order that consigned Spectre Division to the grave. Officially, none of them had survived. Yet here she was, alive and unmistakable, carrying their methods like scars beneath her skin. Another barrage ripped across the water, closer this time. Shards of spray rained down. The Admiral's grip tightened on the rail, but his gaze never left her. Lyra returned to the gunners, her voice cutting sharp. "Hold your fire until they close another 200 yards. Don't waste ammunition. They're trying to bait you." The chief gunner glanced at her, hesitation flickering, but the truth of her words was undeniable. The enemy's shots were falling, deliberately short, herding the horizon to commit too soon. He nodded grimly and relayed the command. Seconds later, the ship surged closer, and this time the horizon's cannons fired in brutal unison. The salvo landed squarely, ripping across the lead destroyer. Fire blossomed, smoke belched from its side as it began to list. Cheers broke again, wild and raw, but Lyra barely heard them. Her eyes were on the next wave of craft rushing in from starboard, sleek and fast, hoping to flank. "Shift 3 guns to starboard, angle low, take them at the waterline," she ordered, pointing. The crews obeyed, adrenaline overriding doubt. Fire roared again, shells smashing into the waterline of the approaching vessels. One tore open instantly, flames consuming it. The others scattered, formation broken. Hale closed his eyes briefly. She wasn't just reacting, she was directing the battle, piece by piece. Like a ghost risen from the past, she carried the instincts of a commander who had lived this dance too many times before. The crew's fear shifted, subtly, dangerously. They were no longer mocking, no longer merely curious. They were starting to trust her, and that, Hale knew, could be more perilous than any enemy shell. Another strike shook the deck, this one slamming into the superstructure. Metal screamed, smoke billowed, men stumbled coughing from the blast. Medics rushed in, hauling wounded away. Lyra ran toward the wreckage, grabbing a fire extinguisher, forcing her way through the haze. Flames licked across torn panels, threatening to spread. She sprayed hard, beating back the fire until others joined her, dragging hoses. Together, they drowned the flames, leaving charred steel and scorched air in their wake. She emerged blackened, coughing, but still upright. Her eyes swept across the deck, finding Hale's gaze once more. For an instant, the Admiral felt his chest tighten. She looked like one of them, fighting shoulder to shoulder, but he knew better. She was something else entirely. "Enemy fleet adjusting course," came the next report. "They're pulling back!" A roar rose from the crew, exhausted yet triumphant. The enemy's line fractured, smoke trailing as they retreated over the horizon. The deck sagged with relief. Sailors slumped against rails, some laughing in disbelief, others staring blankly into the sea as adrenaline ebbed. Lyra leaned against the bulkhead, her lungs burning, hair plastered to her face with sweat and smoke. She closed her eyes just for a heartbeat. But Hale did not allow rest. His voice cut through the aftermath, steady and merciless. All hands remain alert. Damage control, full sweep. We will not be caught unprepared again. The crew stirred, weary but obedient. Then his gaze found her, sharp as ever. He gestured. "Vance, with me." She hesitated only a moment before following him below deck. The corridors stank of smoke and oil, the walls vibrating faintly with the hum of engines. They stopped in a small war room, charts scattered across a table, monitors flickering with status feeds. Hale faced her across the table. His voice was low but heavy with weight. "You've crossed the line. The crew follows your orders as if you wore my insignia. And you've performed tasks no ordinary sailor should even recognize. I want the truth. Now." Lyra steadied herself, her hands gripping the table's edge. She had evaded the question before, hidden behind silence. But the battle had stripped away her cover, left only fragments of denial. She met his eyes. "The truth isn't yours to demand." Hale's jaw clenched. "It became mine the moment you used knowledge meant to die with Spectre division. I buried them. I buried you." The room trembled with his words. For the first time, the unspoken link between them was clear. He had not just known of the program. He had ended it. Lyra's voice was a whisper, but it cut like steel. "Then you already know what I am." Silence filled the room, thicker than smoke. Outside, the crew worked, unaware of the storm brewing in the shadows of command. And for the first time, Admiral Marcus Hale wondered if the greatest threat to the horizon wasn't out there on the sea, but standing right before him. The war room felt too small for the weight inside it. The dim lights cast long shadows across the table, maps and digital overlays spread in restless layers. The hum of machinery filled the silence, a constant reminder that the ship never stopped breathing. Hale stood opposite Lyra, his posture taut, his eyes unwavering. The Admiral, who had weathered decades of storms, seemed for the first time unsettled. Not by the enemy beyond the horizon, but by the figure in front of him. "You should not exist," he said, the words steady but jagged with something deeper. Spectre was erased. "I signed the order myself." Lyra's jaw tightened. Her silence was deliberate, but her presence itself was a contradiction he couldn't ignore. He leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "I need to know what you are doing on my ship. Are you a ghost from a program that should never have been born, or are you here under orders I haven't seen?" Her gaze lifted to meet his. The air between them crackled, heavy with truths neither wanted to voice. "I'm here because your men would be dead if I hadn't acted," she replied finally. "That's all you need to know." The Admiral exhaled sharply, as if the words stung. He straightened, pacing a short line across the cramped room. His boots struck the floor with clipped finality. "You've compromised command. The crew looks at you, not me. They're whispering, wondering. A warship cannot serve two captains." Lyra didn't flinch. "Then don't make me one. Let me do my job, and you keep your command." Hale stopped, turned sharply. "And what exactly is your job, Vance?" "Because logistics doesn't cover rewiring missile batteries mid-battle or correcting fire control trajectories like you were born to it." She said nothing. Her stillness was answer enough. Before the silence could deepen, the comm panel buzzed alive. A strained voice. "Admiral, enemy fleet regrouping, fresh coordinates locked. They're preparing another strike." The room shivered with the implication. Hale hit the switch. "Maintain readiness. I'll be there." He looked back at Lyra, his eyes cold. "This conversation isn't finished." They climbed back to the deck, the sunlight blinding after the dim interior. Smoke still drifted from the superstructure, mingling with the salt spray. The horizon was once again marred by dark shapes. The enemy had not retreated, only pulled back to strike with greater force. The crew bustled with frantic energy. Men slammed shells into magazines, engineers double-checked patch systems. Medics worked quietly over the wounded in corners of the deck. Yet through all the motion, eyes tracked Lyra and Hale as they emerged side by side. Hale strode to the command rail, barking orders with crisp authority. His voice carried rallying men into motion. But the crew's glances still flickered to Lyra, the memory of her interventions etched into their minds. She had become an axis of their survival, whether she wanted it or not. Lyra kept to the side, watching the enemy lines stretch and tighten. Their ships moved like predators circling, engines churning white wakes into the sea. She measured the distance with a hunter's eye, noting the spread, the staggered intervals, the way one vessel lagged intentionally, a decoy. She recognized the pattern instantly. "They'll faint with that straggler," she murmured, half to herself. "Force us to waste rounds while the main line angles closer." The sailor nearest her stiffened, having caught the words. He relayed them up the line almost instinctively. Within moments, the fire control officer adjusted aim, shifting focus. Hale's jaw clenched. He hadn't given that order. She had. The Admiral barked, "Hold fire until my command!" His voice thundered, reclaiming authority. Yet he knew in his gut she had been right before, and she was likely right again now. The loudspeaker crackled. Range closing. Enemy missile tubes opening. A beat of silence, then Hale raised his hand. "Fire!" The horizon thundered, shells streaking across the water. Explosions tore through the enemy line, but just as Lyra had warned, the trailing vessel soaked the brunt of it, already half abandoned, serving its purpose as bait. The main force surged, sliding into optimal range. More alarms wailed. Incoming! Multiple trajectories inbound. The sky filled with streaks of smoke, contrails arcing like claws. The enemy had unleashed their full barrage. "Countermeasures now," Hale commanded. Flares screamed upward, chaff dispersing in glittering clouds. Defensive cannons rattled to life, spitting fire into the heavens. Yet there were too many, too close. Lyra's chest tightened. She moved without waiting. "Starboard crews, focus fire on Cluster 3. Ignore the widespread, they're dummies." Men hesitated, torn between her voice and Hale's. The Admiral froze for a fraction of a second, reading her eyes, weighing instinct against protocol. Then, with a snarl, he slammed his fist against the console. "Do as she says." The guns pivoted. Fire slashed the sky, intercepting the tightest cluster. Explosions rippled mid-air, fragments raining into the sea. 2 missiles broke apart, the third veering wildly before detonating harmlessly. But others punched through. One slammed into the water just off the bow, the blast rocking the ship, throwing men sprawling. Another struck aft, tearing metal, smoke boiling upward. Lyra forced herself up, ears ringing, vision blurred. She staggered toward the smoke, pulling sailors clear from twisted steel. Blood smeared her hands, but she kept moving, dragging the wounded into the arms of medics. Hale descended from the bridge, his face pale but determined. For the first time he spoke not as an accuser, but as a commander clinging to survival. "We need you, Vance. Whatever you are, whatever you've done, you're not done here." Her eyes met his, raw and unguarded. "Then stop fighting me." The deck still burned, the sea still boiled with enemy fire, but something shifted between them. For a moment, the war outside blurred, and the battle within the horizon, the battle over who she was and who he had been when he buried her unit. took center stage. Then another shell screamed overhead, slamming into the water so close the spray doused them both. The moment snapped. Hale's voice rose again, cold and resolute. "Positions! This isn't finished." Lyra nodded once, then turned back to the guns, slipping once more into the rhythm of war. The enemy's fleet loomed larger still, their determination unbroken. The horizon fought on, battered but unyielding, a lone vessel bracing against the storm. And, on its deck, the line between sailor and phantom blurred further, as Lyra Vance's true nature pressed ever closer to the surface. The sea was a cauldron of fire. Smoke rolled across the waves in dense curtains, lit from beneath by the flare of exploding shells. The horizon groaned under the weight of every impact, its steel skin scorched and battered, yet it refused to bow. Above the chaos, the enemy fleet advanced one last time. Their ships, scarred but unbroken, closed in with grim determination. The sky itself trembled with the thunder of war. Lyra stood in the heart of it. Her jacket was torn, her arms streaked with grime, her eyes fixed on the horizon, with the calm of someone who had lived too long with death as her shadow. The crew around her no longer saw a logistics worker. They saw the one person who moved when others froze, who turned failure into survival, range closing fast. A lookout cried, voice cracking as the enemy's silhouettes grew monstrous in the distance. "Prepare final salvo!" Hale's order roared across the deck. The Admiral stood at the command rail, posture rigid, voice cutting through the storm like a blade. Yet, even as he commanded, his gaze slid toward Lyra, acknowledging in silence what his mouth refused to say. The gunners scrambled, hands blistered, shoulders raw from the relentless loading. Smoke blackened their faces, but they moved with determination. They had learned to follow her corrections without hesitation, even when they conflicted with the manual. Lyra stepped forward, her voice carrying without need for amplification. "Shift fire pattern, tight grouping on their lead ship. Break the spear, the rest will scatter." The chief gunner hesitated, eyes darting toward Hale. The Admiral's jaw clenched. Then, with a sharp nod, he gave the word, "Do as she says." The battery adjusted. Steel thundered, cannon spitting fury into the sky. The salvo tore across the waves, striking the enemy's flagship square on. The explosion bloomed monstrous, flames consuming the vessel's deck, smoke spiraling high. A roar erupted from the crew, but it was drowned by the answering barrage. Enemy shells screamed in, one hammering the starboard side, tearing open plating. The deck lurched violently, sailors thrown to the ground, cries of pain rising from the impact site. Lyra was already moving. She sprinted through smoke and chaos, hauling men to their feet, dragging the wounded out of fire's reach. Her voice cut like steel. "Get them clear! Seal the breach! Move!" She grabbed a fallen rifle from the deck, firing upward at the approaching fast craft that had slipped too close. Her shots cracked through the din, forcing the boats to veer away. For a moment, the crew stared, not at her skill with a weapon, but at the composure in her stance, the certainty in her every motion. The battle raged without pause. More explosions tore the sea, flames licking across twisted wreckage. The horizon fought like a beast cornered, claws bared, and Lyra was at its center, no longer hiding, no longer silent. On the bridge, Hale's aide whispered, "Shaken. Sir, the men are looking to her. Every move, every order, they listen." Hale didn't answer at first. His eyes were locked on Lyra as she directed a repair crew, then pivoted to point out incoming threats before the radar confirmed them. Finally, his voice came low, almost to himself. They see what I tried to bury. The aide swallowed. What is she? Hale's reply was grim. Spectre Division. She shouldn't be here. None of them should. Another blast ripped across the bow, jolting them both. Hale gripped the rail, forcing his focus outward again. Signal all batteries. Concentrate fire. This ends now. Lyra climbed back toward the gunners, her lungs burning, her body bruised. She leaned against the railing for only a moment before straightening, scanning the horizon. The enemy line faltered, their flagship sinking, but the remaining ships pressed in reckless, willing to sacrifice themselves. She knew that pattern too. A last, desperate push, the kind that could cripple them even in victory. Shift aim to the second in line, she shouted, gesturing fiercely. Take out its engines, stall their advance. The orders flew. The guns obeyed, and the next volley screamed through smoke. Explosions tore into the targeted vessel, its hull ripping apart. It slowed, dead, in the water, throwing the enemy's advance into confusion. The horizon seized the moment. Every gun fired. Every sailor poured heart and strength into the counterstrike. The sea became a furnace, enemy hulls tearing open, flames clawing at the sky. At last, the retreat horn wailed across the water. The remaining ships turned, limping back through smoke and fire, leaving wreckage in their wake. The deck sagged with exhaustion. Men slumped to their knees, some sobbing with relief, others staring blankly at the devastation they had survived. The horizon listed slightly, battered but afloat. Lyra leaned against the gun housing, chest heaving, sweat and soot streaking her face. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the sounds wash over her. The gasps, the distant cries of the wounded, the creak of tortured steel. Then Hale's voice carried across the deck, not as thunder this time, but as something quieter, heavier. Crew of the horizon, you owe your lives not only to discipline, but to one among you who has carried a burden none of us understood. Every head turned. Every eye found Lyra. The Admiral descended slowly, his gaze locked on her. The silence deepened until the only sound was the sea against the hull. He stopped a pace from her, his voice carrying with deliberate weight. "You've hidden long enough," he said. "But the truth is plain. You are Spectre Division, the unit I was ordered to erase, and you are the proof that its ghosts still walk among us." A murmur surged, but no one dared interrupt. Lyra's jaw tightened. She wanted to deny it, to push the words back into the shadows, but the way the crew looked at her, half in awe, half in fear, told her denial would mean nothing now. She stood taller, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I never asked for this. I tried to bury it. But when lives are at stake, you don't get to choose what part of yourself you hide." The crew's silence was absolute. Even the wounded paused to stare. Hale inclined his head, just enough for the gesture to matter. Then let it be known, this ship sailed into fire and survived because one of its own carried knowledge we did not. You may question her past, but you cannot question her courage. The words landed heavier than any shell. For the first time, the Admiral had spoken not as accuser, but as witness. Lyra exhaled slowly, her eyes scanning the faces around her. They looked at her differently now, not as a stranger in their ranks, but as something both larger and more dangerous. Trust, fear, respect, it was all there, tangled beyond sorting. She turned back toward the horizon, where the enemy fleet smoldered in retreat. The sea still burned, but the horizon stood, scarred yet unbroken. And on its deck, the secret of Spectre Division was no longer hidden. It was alive, undeniable, and embodied in her. The ocean was quiet again, but it was not peace. The battlefield they left behind floated in fragments, blackened wreckage, oil spreading like ink across the waves, and the drifting outlines of ruined hulls that no longer moved. The horizon smoked faintly, marking where fire still burned on ships too damaged to recover. On the horizon's deck, exhaustion clung to every soul. Men sagged against bulkheads, medics knelt over the wounded, engineers checked lines with trembling hands. The vessel still floated, scarred but standing, and that itself felt like a miracle. Lyra remained upright near the rail, her gaze locked on the distance where enemy ships had vanished. Her chest rose and fell, steady despite the storm she had endured. The sleeve of her jacket, torn open beyond repair, left the mark of her past visible to all. No one tried to look away anymore. The crew passed around her with a kind of reverence. Some glanced quickly, others let their eyes linger, searching her face as though it might give them answers. No one dared mock her now. They had seen what silence could not conceal. Admiral Hale emerged from the bridge, his cap in his hand, his hair damp with sweat and smoke. His voice, when it carried across the deck, lacked the iron edge it once bore. Instead, it was weighted with something older, regret. "Crew of the Horizon," he began, his tone roughened by fatigue. "You fought with everything you had. Today we stand because of your resolve, and because one among us bore skills long thought buried." Every sailor's head turned toward Lyra. She did not move, but the weight of their recognition pressed heavy. Hale descended slowly, his boots ringing against the battered deck. He stopped before her, the silence stretching so taut it seemed the sea itself leaned closer to listen. "I was the man who signed the order that ended Spectre Division," he said, his words stark against the wind. "I believed then it was necessary. I believed secrets like that could not be allowed to live. And yet here you are, living proof I was wrong." Murmurs surged across the deck, disbelief rippling through the ranks. Few had ever heard an admiral confess fault in such terms. Lyra's eyes hardened. "You buried us. You buried me." Hale nodded once, the motion slow, deliberate. "And I have carried that weight every day since. Seeing you now, seeing what you did here, I cannot undo the order, but I can acknowledge the truth." The crew listened, spellbound, as the Admiral continued. "This ship owes its survival not just to discipline and steel, but to her. You may fear her past, you may not understand it, but you cannot deny what she is, the reason we are alive." A hush fell, heavy and absolute. Lyra turned, scanning the faces around her. Hardened sailors, men who had sneered at her hours earlier, now looked at her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. They wanted to revere her, yet didn't know how. They wanted to ask questions, but had none that would not sound foolish. She spoke at last, her voice even but edged with weariness. "I didn't come here to lead. I didn't come here to be remembered. I came here to work, to keep my head down, to do my part. But war doesn't care what you want. When lives are at stake, you act, or you lose everything." The words settled over the deck like ash. They were not grand, not rehearsed, but they carried the weight of someone who had seen too much and survived anyway. Hale's expression softened. He inclined his head, an admiral bowing, not to a superior officer, but to a truth greater than rank. "Then today, whether you like it or not, you are part of this crew in a way no order can erase." The sailors stirred, some nodding, others clapping shoulders. A ripple moved through them, acceptance growing where uncertainty had lived. A medic passed close, guiding a stretcher. The wounded sailor Lyra had dragged from the missile's path earlier looked up, pale but conscious, his eyes locked on hers, filled with unspoken gratitude. He raised a trembling hand in salute. Around him, others began to mirror the gesture, not sharp military salutes but a rough acknowledgement born of respect. Lyra's throat tightened, though she kept her face composed. She did not return the gesture, but she inclined her head, the smallest motion carrying the weight of her acknowledgement. The sun lowered toward the west, casting the sea in bands of gold and crimson. Smoke still drifted, but the light broke through, gilding the ship in a glow that made even ruin look noble. As the crew settled into the grim work of repairs, Hale stepped closer to her. His voice dropped, low enough for only her to hear. "You've changed everything. I don't know if Command will thank me for keeping you aboard, or court-martial me for it. But I know this, without you the horizon would be wreckage right now." Lyra's reply was quiet, but steady. "Then let me finish what I started. Don't drag me into politics. Let me keep doing what I must." Hale studied her a long moment, then extended his hand. It was not the gesture of an admiral to a subordinate, but of one survivor to another. After a pause, she took it. Their grip was brief but unyielding, the bond of shared fire. When they released, Hale raised his voice once more, carrying to every corner of the battered vessel. "This day will not be forgotten. The world may never know the details, but every man and woman aboard will remember who stood with them. Hold that memory close, for it will outlive us all." The crew answered with a ragged cheer, not the wild roar of victory, but something deeper, more enduring. A sound of men who had brushed death and found themselves still standing, bound together by an unspoken truth. Lyra turned back to the horizon where smoke met sky, where silence settled heavy after carnage. She felt the crew's eyes linger, but she no longer shrank from it. She was not just the woman who had loaded missiles, not just the ghost of a unit condemned to oblivion. She was something harder to name, and perhaps that was enough. The sun slid lower, painting the sea in fire. The horizon ploughed forward, its scars glowing in the dying light. And amid the wreckage of war, a legend walked its deck, unwanted, undeniable, alive. The sea never forgets. It carries the echoes of fire, the weight of wreckage, the silence that follows after screams fade. And on the deck of the horizon, those echoes found a new keeper. Lyra Kane never asked for recognition. She never sought the gaze of admirals or the reverence of sailors. She only wanted to work in shadows, hidden from the world that once betrayed her. But history has a way of finding those who try hardest to escape it. That day, when the ocean turned into a furnace, her past refused to stay buried. The crew saw more than a woman with calloused hands and quiet resolve. They saw the spirit of Spectre Division, the program they were told never existed, alive before them, defying erasure. They saw survival, not by chance, but by her will. Admiral Hale admitted what no one thought possible, that he had been wrong. Wrong to bury the very people who could carry hope through the darkest waters. Wrong to think loyalty could be silenced with orders and ink. For the first time, the Admiral bowed, not to rank, but to truth. And in that bow, the crew understood something greater than medals or victories, that sometimes one person's refusal to break can hold back the flood, that sometimes legends aren't born, they survive. When the smoke cleared and the sun touched the horizon in fire, the sailors raised their hands to her. Not as an officer, not as a superior, but as the reason they lived to see another dawn. Lyra didn't return the salute. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. Because this story isn't about titles or the orders carved into history books. It's about the ones who carry scars instead of ranks, the ones who bear the weight of decisions made in rooms far away, the ones who, when the world laughs at them, simply act. This is Veteran Biker, If this story moved you, tell us in the comments below. Who do you salute when the smoke clears? Hit like, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe if you ride with us every week. Because legends don't ask to be remembered. We remember them together.